Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Today, myself and Simon are just going to have a quick conversation to try and answer a simple question about lead generation and to offer some ideas and tips you can hopefully implement in your own work. We hope you find it of value. Welcome back to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell, here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 34. And the title of today's pod is "A lead without intent is just contact information." And that idea and that phrasing actually has been around for a little while now in the digital marketing zeitgeist. And I think it nicely encapsulates the sort of changing attitudes that we're seeing in lead gen digital marketing, customer acquisition. And today we kind of want to explore that in a little more depth, and as well as sort of looking at what it means, also kind of see if we can come up with some practical and actionable tips that people listening can use to try and implement in their own work. Simon, I'll just say it again, just so it's clear: a lead without intent is just contact information. That phrase, I think to get us started, I think the best thing to do actually is just ask you, why is intent so important?
I guess intent is really the sort of barometer of the interest that a person has in your product or service. So measuring that intent informs what's going to happen next. And that's really what we're talking about. So are you only going to be contacting people that are interested in hearing from you? You can be interested in like creating something like a contact method that's much more efficient, that's going to work off the intent that people have. Are you thinking of reducing costs by only contacting people that want to hear from you? And ultimately, it's really about, are you going to be using marketing effectively? So it's marketing that tends to get the intent right. So if you're doing the marketing properly, you know what's happening is you're generating leads of prospects that come in with a genuine desire to hear from you, whether that's via email or telephone call or SMS, whatever it is.
And just to sort of, I think it's worth, before we come delving a bit deeper, just sort of clarifying. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but we will just sort of set tone. The clarifying the difference between consent and intent, because although I think everyone knows the difference between the two, they're still kind of mistaken, or where people place their priorities between the two things changes now and again. You see what I mean?
Yeah. So a lead without intent is basically contact information, like you said at the top. So would you even call it a lead? It's just data. I think it falls into a different category that we probably, I think this is where it's always become blurred between intent and consent, is they've traditionally always been called leads together because it's just been like the data of someone that can be contacted. But I think we need to separate those two and recognize one is contact information and the other is lead. And I think what happens as well is that people or companies mistake their intent and put it onto a record that just has consent. So their intent is to make a sale, but the actual data itself, or the person behind the data, has zero intent, and all they have is a consent to contact them. So it can get lost there. It also comes down to a sort of volume thing, I think, as well, where still conversation around quality over quantity. So everyone feels like if they're getting more, it means more success, or they can do more with it, or whatever else. But that isn't really happening. All that's happening is you having to move more of your cost to the sales function, or to the media buying function. So yeah, that's really all that's happening from it. And I'd say as we move into sort of world where first party data is paramount, I suspect a lot of people might be thinking that, like, you need to collect as much as you can. but really it's the opposite. Like less is more. This first party data world, where it's becoming like the most important thing that a brand can have, because it's the way that they can build relationships and own the sort of conversation and communication with their prospects. All that's going to happen if you go for a load of like consent-based data is you're just going to annoy a bunch of people. That's bad for brand awareness. It's bad for the sales team's morale. It's bad for the operating costs of trying to convert people. First-party data, the actual sort of method of collecting it and the execution of contacting and everything else needs to be based on like the intent of behind the person, not just the fact that you have consent.
The thing is, though, I mean, as I said at the start, I want this to be a practical thing, and I worry sometimes we talk about these things in an idealistic way, and we talk about what would be great to happen. But I imagine some people listening will be like, "Yeah, I agree in theory," but say their job, I don't know, say they're CMO for a company or whatever, and I don't know whether it's like the hangover for how things used to be done, or this preventing that change. But if they're thinking, I would love leads all have intent, but I've got targets to hit, I've got, I guess we're going to the metrics people are using to measure that how well they're doing in their job. What I'm trying to say is, do we need to sort of see change higher up, I guess, to allow for sort of marketers to be able to only focus on intent? Because they might be thinking, I've still got to hit these targets. I've got to get leads that are consent. There's not actually much intent in them. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, the targets are fucked. I mean, I can't play any other way.
That's a more concise way of putting it.
I mean, I guess it sort of depends on what your targets are. So you're right. Like that's another conversation which comes down to the our sales and marketing siloed and they're not working together, because really marketing should be based on the amount of sales are being made. They're not making the sales, that's the sales team. But if you align the targets with them, they're going to go after the leads that make sales. And I know plenty of organizations, as you've touched on, that actually get judged from a data buying perspective on the volume that they get, because they've got a certain number of like heads in call centers, for example. And they need to give those heads like 20, 30 records an hour in order to be able to fuel a level of sales at an ROI that achieve sales that will hit ROI. And so they have to buy like loads and loads of list data or consent-based data. The thing is, you can actually just still hit that same level of sales with much higher intent data, and you just remove the cost from the sales team. So in terms of their targets, you're right. It's it could come from higher up, and it's just a different way of thinking about data, and it's understanding this difference between consent and intent. Because when you're relying on consent, what's really sort of happening is, imagine if you run an ad for lead generation and you're collecting a load of pertinent details which create a highly engaged prospect that's definitely showing purchasing intent. Imagine calling people with consent only is the equivalent of calling everyone that's only seen that ad. So what's happening is, I don't know what percentage would convert into leads from viewing the ad. Let's say it's 15%. It means that you're still doing the equivalent of calling 85%. They're not getting consent, by the way. I'm just using an analogy. So it's just hugely inefficient. So that, if you're a CMO or the buyer of leads, whatever, at these companies, it definitely, you need to rethink how this is being done potentially.
I think Daryl Alfonso, who we spoke to a couple of weeks ago now, talked about that as well. And he was sort of saying how he's seeing the role of the CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer, kind of becoming more and more sort of important. And, people didn't even have that role a couple of years ago in some companies, but it's becoming far more vital. And that does sort of, by necessity, de-silo those two departments, because they're working together. It forces that single vision. And it'll be interesting if it's one of those things that you see people like Amazon thinking in these ways, and other big companies, whether people will follow suit and go for the sort of more, I guess you call demand gen, even though that's more B2B, but in B2C, that kind of side of it materialize.
I suppose one way of looking at this as well is that if you're buying lists of data or relying on consent-based stuff only, and you're let's imagine they're putting it into a call center and they're calling it rather than emailing it. That isn't marketing. There's zero marketing happening, right? It's just like nothing.
Yeah.
It's a CMO, if they're doing that, I don't understand why a CMO would be doing that. I think what usually happens is it's someone within the sales team who is buying the leads that is actually doing it. Because if you're doing marketing, you wouldn't, how does that fit in with your brand awareness? How many people does it piss off? How many people are they going to tell that it's pissed off? If you're looking after the brand, I don't ever believe that it's an exercise that you'd probably carry out, because you'd be too aware of the problems associated with it. So yeah, chief revenue officer, if they can sort of be parachuted in and sit between the sales and marketing roles and sort of own that piece, could well identify that the marketing team need to be brought in to deliver more intent-based leads, and so they can get over this sort of confusion between them.
And another thing I just want to ask you, you touched upon, but I think it's worth expanding, is the brand awareness and how the brand is perceived through lead gen. Because I think that brand awareness is almost undervalued or almost under acknowledged within the exercise of lead gen. And you think, like I think we said before, like if you're running lead gen, you're putting the brand out there. And I mean, one side of that is, it seems mental to me that a big company would let someone else, do that and harm their, not harm their brand awareness because they're not doing the lead gen themselves. But also it's almost like it's inevitable there'll be some kind of brand awareness when you run adverts, things like that, and lead gen. And it's going to go one of two ways. If you're just after consent and you're pissing people off, and you are going to harm your brand, or the mirror image of that is if you're doing well and getting high intent leads, people actually engaged, and you're actually going to improve your brand awareness. I think that's, I was going to see what you thought about that, because I think that's an interesting avenue of lead gen that I think often gets missed.
Yeah. I mean, I've got so many sort of stories that have happened in the past around this, and people not understanding how leads are collected in the first place. But just to touch on what you were mentioning about the brand awareness, when you generate leads, and let's say it's done online, because a lot of it is, there's also telephone generated leads, and there's face-to-face and a few other methods. But let's focus on the people doing like PPC or affiliate or native or Facebook. You have to run a massive amount of adverts to get the traffic that see those adverts wherever they are, and whatever it says, that click on those adverts that then become leads. And if you're running lead generations, you're trying to generate leads that then turn to sales. And so what you're actually measuring is the full funnel from the advert being shown to someone to how many sales does it actually convert to. It means you have to optimize the adverts to just show to target audiences that are in your TAM or target audience that you want to hit. And it's a far more efficient way of running banner ads, right? I mean, we touched on this with Augustine Fu, where we were talking about programmatic ads where they're showing them. I mean, I don't even know what that achieves. It's just like brand awareness. And from what he was saying, more than 50% is just fraudulent anyway. You literally cannot afford that with lead generation. So if you look at the channels that lead generators or professional lead generators tend to run in, it's like low fraud, high impact, high sales, everything else. So I can't actually think of a better way of building brand awareness for a brand than actually running lead gen ads, because that consent-based stuff that we were talking about, as in the analogy of calling them, if you're hitting the right target audience, I mean, your ads for your leads are just going, hitting the right place. This is like prime time TV in a Coronation Street advert being shown, and that's your ideal audience. Do you know what I mean, though? It's an absolute no-brainer. I just can't understand why every brand on earth, as long as their CPA fits within it, isn't thinking more like that, of running lead gen ads and thinking of the brand awareness within it, and then tracking all that back to the sales, and it naturally promotes the targeting to be exactly right. The other point you mentioned is I've had this quite a lot in the past where a brand said, so this was a few years ago, so before we sort of moved into lead gen software and lead management software, and I was doing some media buying for a few brands and things, and I was trying to encourage them to run on certain channels, and I think it was like native Facebook, a couple of other things, just some lead gen ads with a multi-step page. This must be like 6-7 years ago now. And I was just taking them through where traffic comes from. So I was like, go onto Facebook, there'd be an advert like this. I went into like MSN, said, this is what native stuff looks like. And they said, but this is clickbait. I was like, well, it's not clickbait. We're just showing adverts like a target audience. And obviously we need a hook. So we're saying something like, I can't remember what the advert said. And they said, no, we just want to carry on getting the lists of data that we do because we know where it comes from. So I was like, you don't know where it comes from. You mean you know where you're buying the list of data from? You know where the data was originated. So how, you can't just like magic data up. It doesn't like just materialize out of somewhere. How has that data been generated? Is it even in like the target audience and the ads they've seen and whatever else? It's a strange thing the way people look at it. That data might have been have come from porn sites. Could have been from absolutely anywhere. I mean, you can go back. Most of it's from co-reg sites, right? It's like co-font stuff that's come from co-reg sites, because there's only a certain amount of data that you can actually collect at high volume in different places. And really, this needs to like start informing you thinking about a difference between consent and intent. And there's nothing wrong with co-reg. It's perfectly legitimate, but we're talking about, that's a form of lead generation, right? But we're talking about post co-reg, like 6-month-old list data, like a call center might be dialing, or someone might be emailing to try and get sales from.
Yeah, I think as well, it's just it comes back to the quality side as well, and also it's worth noting that there is a spectrum of intent too. You can have like a small bit of intent, and you can be like ready to buy. Like that's a whole spectrum of stuff. And I guess where people sit within that spectrum should inform how you deal with it too. People are like coming through and they're not quite ready. They're sort of interested. They can be nurtured to that point, or if people are absolutely ready to buy it, it's like, and as you say, you've got to really sort of understand this data, where it comes from, everything has brought them to that point where they are in the journey, and it's like whether you nurture them to buy or however it goes. But it'll be interesting to see how it develops as we're predicting first party data will become more valuable, and people have said, you see companies now saying we need to get more first party data. But I think you pointed out a while ago, which I want to come back to, and I'm going to end on that note. You don't need more first party data. You need more first party data with strong intent. That kind of, it's not just for the sake of it. You don't just need loads of first party data just because that's what you think. There's no third party data we can use now. We've got to get first party data, whatever it is. It still comes back to that. You need that intent. Otherwise, like you say, what's the point? It's just contact information.
And on the point you mentioned, exactly, there's like degrees of intent. So co-reg, for example, great way to build like a list of data, potentially for like an email database to send to a CRM and nurture and things. But purchasing intent, probably not a massive amount unless it's like highly qualified. But then you get like, I don't know, £50 lead via Facebook or £10 lead, whatever, and converting it 25-30%, there's very high intent behind it. So there's, the key thing is that they're leads effectively, and there is an interest there already.
Well, I think we've covered a fair bit there, and we'll wrap it up with these short, as we call them, internal ones, just mean you chatting about stuff without guests to help us. But hopefully people listening will find that I think that's informative, just interesting, just thought provoking, I guess, is what we're hoping we will think. That was episode 34. A lead without intent is just contact information.
Cool.
Thanks Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.